we are doing the thing. Well, I am doing the thing. And if you looked at the thumbnail and clicked on this video, you probably know what the thing is. I am reading Spare by Prince Harry, the record-breaking memoir that came out a few days ago. It has been in the headlines constantly since the leak of some of its contents, like 4 or 5 days before the book was supposed to come out on January 10th. And let's be real, it had been in the headlines well before that, basically since the moment the publisher, Penguin Random House, announced that this book was coming a couple of years ago, probably a year, 18 months. But yeah, I'm here to do this video. It's going to be one of those, I read the book so you don't have to, not in like the negative way, but just as a point to say like, this is not going to be spoiler free. I'm going to be addressing some of the things undoubtedly that were leaked, as well as things that were not leaked and that I thought were interesting and I wanted to make comments on. I will admit that I am very much a royal watcher. I grew up that way. My mom was very much obsessed with Princess Diana and Prince William and Prince Harry, and I grew up kind of surrounded by that. But also, I am someone who's very interested in the royal families of Europe in general, both from a historical and kind of pop culture reference point. But I will say, like, ever since the Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced that they were stepping back, that they were not going to be full-time working royals, that they were going to be living as private citizens, I have been following the coverage. Yes, I am one of those obnoxious people, but I have tried very much over the course of those like 3 years now, because I think it was January 2020 that they made that announcement. I've always tried to follow coverage on both sides of this debate, this family argument, this whatever you want to call it. I've tried to listen to the side that is very pro-Sussex, and I've tried to listen to the side that is very pro-royal family. So I'm going to try to be as objective as possible here and point out areas of the book where I agree with Harry, feel empathy for him, on some level understand what he's going through and how he might have come to this conclusion, as well as pointing out the times when I don't agree with Harry, or I think that what he's doing might not be the best way to do it. I'm going to try to pick out those moments, because I can honestly say that there are things that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have done that I don't like, and there have been things that the royal family have done or said or not done that I don't like as well. So I don't think either side of this is right 100% of the time. So we're gonna go on this adventure, which only happened because somehow I managed to snag an audiobook through Libby from my local library system, because when I tried to use the New York Public Library, they had like 200 something copies of the audiobook. All of them had like 8 people on the waiting list, and it was telling me I'd maybe get the book in 16 weeks. So yeah, somehow I managed this. So we're gonna go through it, and hopefully you enjoy it. Like I said, this will not be spoiler free, so if you don't want to hear any spoilers, come back to this video at another time. All right, let's do this. Let's do the thing. All right, excuse me for my appearance. I am taking a quick break from work to film this clip because I just listened to, which is effectively the prologue for Spare, which takes place after Prince Philip's death and funeral, and it's supposed to be this conversation that took place between King Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry. And writing-wise, I would say there's a lot of kind of metaphor and simile and purple prose, but also like Princess Diana factors in pretty heavily, kind of as Harry's doing a lot of thinking
before his father and his brother join him in the garden. But a couple of things stood out for me. One is the like quote where Harry says that his brother's resemblance to their mother is fading, which I feel like is just kind of a really snarky type of remark to make.
How rude!
But I think the thing that kind of stuck out to me is that Princess Diana was, I think, 36 when she passed away. And Prince William is 40. I think he's turning 41 this year, if I remember rightly. So already Prince William is older than what anyone can remember Princess Diana being. She was still in her mid-30s. And so it's kind of a case of like, you have no idea what aging would have done to Princess Diana. You don't know what she would have looked like at William's age, or at 50, at 60. You have no way of knowing, so you can't really say that there might not have been a family resemblance, because it might have. So I feel like that was kind of unnecessary. And the other thing though, like if you were giving a point to like Harry, is his confusion at his father and his brother's lack of understanding for why he left. And that stuck with me too, because he says that King Charles and Prince William said they did not understand why he did what he did. Which this is after the Oprah interview. This is after all sorts of coverage and supposedly conversations behind the scenes, you would think. So for them to just not understand, to not take into account that like this is someone who gave up everything he knew for reasons, and you kind of have put blinders up or are just refusing to listen, that also has to sting. And so those were the two things that stuck out for me in that little bit. All right, I'm back. I came to get one of these from the kitchen, and I was just like, okay, I've listened to an hour. I'm at, I think, chapter 8. And basically, this whole section of the book is around Princess Diana's death. So the book starts at that point, which I think is very, very telling, because this is kind of, I think, where Harry feels his story began. This is the moment in time that set his life on a particular course. And I find it interesting, the little like snippets into how like the royal family is living at Balmoral during their like summer holiday. Talks about like King Charles's like headstands or handstands that he does, and like Highland baths, and like all these little minute details. But it's really kind of sad to hear him talking about finding out his mother has died. And like he's a 12, 13-year-old kid who has lost his mother and is not crying. Like the people around him aren't crying. There's all this debate about the royal standard and the funeral. And there's this, I remember this detail that he says about like shaking the wet hand, because these people have been like wiping away tears. And he doesn't cry until he sees the coffin going into the ground, and he says it's because it's the very idea of his mother dying. He doesn't actually believe that she is dead. So there's a lot to unpack there. Although one thing, because he talks about this moment at school where Fergie, the Duchess of York, brings a gift that his mother had bought for him just before she died, and he says it's an Xbox, and he says like that basically this is it's almost like a legend, like this is what people tell him happened, and he doesn't necessarily remember it. There's a lot of like nods to what he can and can't remember. But they say an Xbox, and this is 1997. I looked it up because I was just like, I was a big gamer. Like, I had PlayStations, I had Xbox, and I'm like, I don't think they were around in 97. Like, there weren't. So, is that just like Harry and the writer proving the point that, like, this is what everyone's been told, but it's not necessarily true? That's just the story. Or is this really bad fact checking? That's where I am. Good evening. This is probably going to be the last spare update for today. It is like 6 p.m. I've been listening to the audiobook while I worked because it was a slower day. So a lot of it was like sending off emails and admin type things. I am 20% into this book, and I've been taking notes. So I have tons of notes here so that I wouldn't forget the things that I wanted to touch on in this section, because there are a few. There are a few. Some of them I feel like have been hashed and rehashed in like the news coverage since the leak, but some of it not so much. So hopefully I have some interesting facts and insights for you. So one is that he talks about his first trip to Africa with his father. It's like a quote unquote business trip. So it's not a vacation. Then Prince Charles, now King Charles, was there as part of his royal duties. He took Harry with him. And it's interesting because this is one of the like moments so far where he's talking kind of about imperialism, because he's talking about Rorke's Drift and that battle. And he talks about like not understanding at the time sort of the evils of imperialism, and what he focused on as a young boy was sort of the manly bravery of these military personnel, soldiers in battle. Lots of Victoria Crosses were given out. I think that was one of the things he talks about, but also kind of this power of Britain type moment. And it's just interesting to hear him talk about imperialism. And I know critics of Harry are going to like pick this out and talk about it being like woke and all that annoying stuff, but I do find it interesting that he's aware enough now to acknowledge kind of the evils of imperialism that he didn't when he was a child. And so that shows some development in him, and I do appreciate that, because I don't really think by and large the royal family has kind of really acknowledged the harm that they caused kind of on a global scale with their empire building. So that was one of the things. And then this is kind of where I feel like you start to see how Prince Harry and the media come to butt heads and sort of understand the antagonistic relationship he has with the media from a young age. Not only because of everything around his mother, but his own personal experience. One of those, sorry, that's my heat. One of those moments is this like Camilla summit. So apparently like Prince Charles invites William to meet Camilla, and William reports back to his brother that, you know, she's trying. Harry ends up meeting Camilla. And this is where, like, I know it's been covered everywhere, but like, Harry says that he and his brother asked Charles not to marry Camilla, to be with her, to be happy. But Harry's logic is, you know, if you marry her, she's always going to be compared to Mummy, your first wife. And no one, including Camilla, wants that. But he talks about how the two of them meet with Camilla, and this like leaks to the press. So he accuses Camilla, the queen consort now, of working with the media through her spin doctor or whomever, the PR team, to put this story in the media that the princes have met her and blah blah blah. Kind of part of her campaign to win goodwill in the media after being the third person in the marriage, sort of thing. And so that's one of the instances where he starts talking about what the press is doing. But he also talks about, like, another instance where this editor decides to paint him, much like once he's older, to paint him as this like drug addict, that she has like none of the facts straight. And once again, like, he feels that he's kind of thrown to the wolves, using that expression that I think was in the Harry and Meghan documentary, because his father and Camilla's PR team basically use this to paint, he feels like, his father as this harried single dad with a drug addict for a son. And so he has a lot of these moments where he's talking about the press and how they go after him. He talks about an editor basically hunting him down, through the media and these tabloid stories and all of that. And so you can understand, I think, where he's coming from because of those things. I mean, he's relatively young when all of this is happening. And yes, he admits to doing drugs. He talks about smoking weed at Eton. He talks about doing lines of cocaine. But he also talks about how, you know, like, it's kind of what kids do. They experiment. Like, he was in no way a drug addict. And so for them to paint him that way in the media, and then to use pictures of him like doing royal visits to like rehab facilities and using that to say, oh, he's gone to rehab or whatever, like, just really messing with the truth. And so yeah, there's a lot of that press stuff, which I feel like is, again, a lot of what they've already spoken about. They being the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It was part of the Oprah interview. It was part of the 6-part documentary. It's something that he's said in basically the 4 or 5 interviews that he did to promote the book as well. So I think it makes sense that the media is like the big bad wolf here, especially in these sections. But there is some stuff that's just like weird to me. And like, I don't, maybe some of you can make sense of it. So one, he talks about going to Eton, and that's where Prince William was as well. And he talks about his brother not wanting to fraternize with him. Like, you don't know me, don't talk to me, like, ugh, gross. And part of me is just like, that just feels like such a like inconsequential thing. And I feel like that is normal older sibling, younger sibling dynamics. Because I know I definitely went through that phase with my own sister. And maybe it hurt her feelings at the time, but I don't feel like if she were to write her memoir, that would be something that she brings up or that has had like this huge impact on her life. Like, you just do those things. Like, the younger sibling wants to follow around and you don't want to. But I feel like that's normal stuff. So to me, that's one of those things where I'm like, is it important? Is it? I don't know. And then there's also this more moment too when he talks about the future King of England plotting his revenge on him.
I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
And I'm just like, again, it's just such a petty sort of remark that I don't like because it's it like it just feels like unnecessarily strong worded at this point. Like they're boys and teenagers. Like I feel like it would have a different connotation if you said like my brother, my big brother was plotting his revenge versus the future King of England. Like it makes him sound like a future Nero or Caligula or something like that. So that one I didn't like. And you know, I've gotten through 20% of this book. So I want to say that I'm enjoying it. Do I think it's the best thing on the planet? No. I think some of it at this point feels a little bit overwritten by the ghostwriter. And an example of that is there's a trip to Africa, another trip, and apparently a leopard appears, and Harry talks about how he feels like the leopard is his mother or is like a messenger from his mother there to tell him like everything's gonna be okay type of thing. And when you do that sort of stuff in fiction, it's one thing, like trying to add meaning to something to give symbolism. But when you're doing it in a memoir, it kind of feels very ham fisted or heavy handed. Which expression do I want? And so then it becomes a case of is that what Harry thought, or is that the ghostwriter taking some license to spin a really nice story? And maybe Harry did think that. Maybe. It seems a little weird that he would think that, but maybe he did. But there are moments like that that I'm kind of like, and the same thing with the future King of England plotting his revenge. Like, again, is that the writer doing what writers do? You know, like in a story, you need antagonists. You need a protagonist, and then you need an antagonist. And so Harry's very obviously going to be the hero of his own story and perspective. So painting other people as the antagonist makes sense. But yeah, it's just interesting to see those things. So right now I'm gonna go eat food and watch TV. I'm probably not gonna listen to any more of the audiobook for now. But we've passed the virginity scene, which I feel like everyone has heard about now. It's like it literally is touched on by like a sentence or two. Like it's not anything major. We've talked about is it the Diamond Jubilee? The 50th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's reign. And we've just left off with a friend of his, Henner's, I believe, dying in a car accident, and him seeing that as an actual death, which at this point he's still talking about his mother being missing or absent and not being dead. So we've covered basically his adolescence. He's now a grown man and about to start his gap year before going into the military. So we have a lot of ground to cover still, but we are, as far as I know, still in part one of the book. Anyway, I have rambled on for a very, very long time now about all the things. So I'm going to go, and I will check in with you guys hopefully tomorrow with a little more on Spare. Have a good one, guys.
Good morning. It's like 7 a.m., but I've been awake forever, which is my usual state of affairs. So I've been listening to Spare. And the part that I've covered has been a lot about his gap year and meeting Cressida, his girlfriend, and I'm sure and even King Charles and Camilla marrying. Um, but that's not the part that I want to talk about just yet. The part I want to talk about is the fancy dress party or costume party, because I feel like that has come up a lot, and I have feelings about it. So basically, Harry is supposed to be going to this fancy dress party with William and Kate, and the theme is colonists and natives or something along those lines, which is, as Harry says, a very cringy name for a party. And Harry's having a bunch of issues figuring out a costume, so he goes to a costume shop, and the like two options he chooses or narrows it down to are, I think he says, a pilot and the Nazi uniform. And he says that like Will and Kate laugh at it, and so he ends up going with the Nazi costume. No one at the party makes a comment, and then like the photos get sold and it's all over the media. Heil Harry pictured in a Nazi uniform. And a couple of things. I don't necessarily understand, first of all, on the like basic level, how that costume supposedly fit with the theme. But that's neither here nor there. Why is there a costume of a Nazi in the first place? But also just like how are you in a shop filled with all these costumes and that's the one that you're like pulled towards? That I will never ever understand. And he talks about the fact that like his father says, like when you're young, this is when you make mistakes, you're still forming as a human being, like we all do stupid things. And that's true. I'm not saying that's not true. But this in particular, I just have a really tough pill swallowing. Like, he's not a child, so he knows the history. He knows or has heard of, at the very least, the Holocaust and all the horrible, disgusting things the Nazis did. Like, and he says, like, his brain was turned off, basically. He says he wasn't thinking. But I don't necessarily like that as an excuse. I don't think it works. And I mean, I know I personally am someone who is like, I studied history. The world wars in particular were very interesting to me, so I've made a study of them. So I know I have a like more of a stake in it because of my study. But I don't get the, oh, my brain was turned off. Oh, it's a youthful indiscretion. I think those are just all really lame excuses for that. And then my thing too, which a lot of like the press coverage and media coverage has been, is basically William and Kate's sort of tacit approval of the costume, or even their like blatant approval of the costume, because they supposedly laughed and didn't tell him not to wear it. And again, I feel weird about that too, because part of me is just like, yeah, no, they were in the wrong. The two of them should have said, no, you can't do that. Like, no. Because they were even older than Harry was at the time. So that should have been a thing. But also, the way that it was like spun in the media was basically Harry saying he wouldn't have worn the uniform if Will and Kate had told him not to, or if they had like stressed discomfort. And I'm kind of like, you were a young man. You made the choice. Don't kick the blame down the road or try to make it seem like someone else forced you to do the uniform. Um, because even if they did laugh, which they shouldn't have, they should have realized it was not the right thing to do. At any point, Harry could have decided, well, they didn't say anything, but I'm not going to wear it. Like, he's the one at the end of the day who put his legs in that costume, buttoned or zipped it up, and left the house. So that kind of bugs me. But I think it's more like, I know it's a kind of a learning, a teachable moment for him. And he goes and speaks with a rabbi, and the rabbi forgives him, and basically tells him, like, use this to teach, um and learn from it yourself. And I like that part of it, but still my brain, because I remember seeing those pictures because I was in high school. I think it's 2005 maybe, so I was like 14, 15 at the time. And me even seeing just the pictures without the like headlines was like, oh my god, oh my god. So I still don't understand that whole episode, but that's where I am right now in the book, about 30% ish. So I still have a long way to go, people, a long way. I'll check in at some point later with more thoughts, I'm sure.
Hello. Good afternoon. And sorry, you might hear in the background my heat doing its little clicking noise. The joys of owning an old house. So I am now a third of the way through Spare, and I've just started part 2. I'm a few chapters into that, and I have thoughts, a bunch. Like, there's some things that have stuck out from what I finished reading in part 1 and things from part 2. The like first things that I'll talk about is like the Princess Diana stuff. He talks about getting the police report and reading through those files for like some search for closure. And he talks about later how while he's in Paris, he actually has his driver drive him through that tunnel at the speed that Princess Diana's car was going at. And he's just kind of shocked by how commonplace the tunnel is. Like, it's not long and windy. And he talks about, like, in that moment he realizes, like, all of his years of kind of being in denial and thinking that she's just in hiding, like, that all falls away, and he realizes she's gone, she's dead. And he's like 23 at this time, so it took him a very long time to come to grips with that. And even when he did, he talks about talking with Prince William about it and thinking that the inquest that they did was a farce, and how they want to like put a statement out and have it like an inquiry reopened, and how they're talked out of that plan. And so again, his mother's playing pretty prominently there. And from all of that, you hear him very squarely placing the blame on the paparazzi, or the paps, as he calls them, time and time again. He talks about looking at the photos from the crime scene and seeing all the flashes and like the reflections while his mother is like in the car unconscious. It's just interesting to see that all from his perspective. And like, the inquest blames the driver because the driver had alcohol in his system, and the driver, he says, like, he's dead, so he can't speak to any of this. But it's very obvious that Harry blames the paparazzi for potentially causing the distractions that led to this car accident in this tunnel that is surprisingly short to him. So that was a big thing that kind of came up and was interesting. But the other part that kind of stuck out to me in these sections that I've read that cover his time in, oh my god, was it Australia? I think it was Australia. It might have been New Zealand. I'm pretty sure it was Australia. Then in Africa, and then his time at Sandhurst, is you really do get a sense of just how traumatic the press attention was for him as a young man, whether he was in his teens or a young adult in his 20s. And I mean, I think that's the part that I have so much sympathy for him with, because this is a young man, a kid at some points of this book, who is being targeted by the paparazzi because they know that stories about Prince Harry will sell papers. They know this. They know people are very, very interested in Princess Diana's boys. He's a young prince. He knows the world is interested in, they know the world is interested in that. And he doesn't get the privacy that he desires, but also, like, everything that I feel like we all go through as, like, young people is amplified for him because it's all put on the front page of magazines. They make him out to be a drug addict. He injures himself, and so his, like, time at Sandhurst, like, entering the military, has to be postponed. And, like, they then, like, say it's cowardice, like that's what's keeping him from going into the military. When he's in school, they accuse him of cheating, and that becomes headlines. And, like, even when he's in the, like, he's gone through training, he's about to be deployed, like, they put all this stuff in the media, which then prevents him from actually going with his group. And then the press says, oh no, it's because he's a coward. He doesn't want to go on the front lines. He doesn't want to serve. And it's just like, he's being accused of all these hurtful things as a young man on a very public scale. That's where I have sympathy for him, because to grow up in the spotlight, to have every single thing you do twisted by the media to make it more sensational so that it can sell papers, I can't fathom what that feels like at any age, but also at such an impressionable age. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what stuck out to me a lot at this point in the book, is that very much at this point, like, yeah, he's made some remarks about his brother, and he's made some remarks about Charles and Camilla, but really a lot of what the memoir is focusing on is him trying to come to grips with his mother's death and struggling to do so, and also dealing with this press attention, this intrusive press attention, which for him a lot of the times feels like just not true. The focus on the media, the focus on his mother, these are all things that the documentary talked about, their interview with Oprah, all of these other interviews he did to promote the book. Like, it's not surprising. What I do feel like is surprising is those, like, really candid moments where he talks about, like, the bolt that went into his knee and messed that up, or the trench foot when he was doing some march, or his like relationship with his brother, which at times like he talks about them having a moment and talking about their mother's death for the first time, and he's 23, so that means William's in his mid-20s at that point. And like they're on the same side, but he also talks about the fact that there is this dynamic between him, this competitiveness, where he says William cares what he's doing because he cares about kind of this hierarchy. But it's just interesting that he also comments a lot on that. And I guess that makes sense considering that the book is called Spare. So he's talking about his place in this system as the backup for William if anything happens to him, and how that impacts his life and his sense of purpose and all of that. So I don't know. So far, we're moving along. I feel like it's a really easy read. Like, I'm cruising through it. I only started this book yesterday. Anyway, I'm currently working technically, so I'm gonna go. But I thought I would share those insights now into that, because we're kind of in Harry's mid-20s now. Or not mid-20s, early 20s. Mid-20s? What would you consider 23? It's kind of on the cusp of both, so I don't know. Anyway, going now. This is going to be a quick update. Frustration on Harry's behalf. Because he goes through all of the training at Sandhurst, basic, everything. And because, like, the press makes such a big deal of him being in the military, as I already mentioned, like his deployment, his tour was delayed because basically they, like, extremists were targeting him and talking about targeting him, which would make him and anyone around him, like, it would just make it dangerous, like life-threateningly so. So it gets postponed, and then he finds a way to actually serve as he wants to. It's really important to him. He goes, and I mean, he goes and he's like, has to be hidden so no one knows that he's going, and he's like, he's doing his job, he's doing a great job, he's having this life experience, and then he ends up having to be pulled out because there's chatter from the extremists about Red Fox, and they basically know where he is, or at least close enough that it's a threat to his life, and again, to everyone serving with him. And it's all, again, because the media and the newspapers start covering and start sharing information. And it's really frustrating to hear that, like, how he wants to do something for his country. He wants to do this thing that's really patriotic. He wants to do this thing that is really, really courageous. I have so much respect for anyone in the military. And basically at every turn he's getting resistance because of how much, like, attention and spotlighting he's getting. So it's really frustrating. And I feel for him in those moments because it's very clear that this is something that he very much wants to do. Like, he wants this to be his thing. He wants this as a career. It's like a vocation or a calling for him. So, oh my goodness. That is very, very frustrating. So frustrating.